Virtual reality is kind of a lifelong dream. It's not something where I watched one piece of, one movie and said, oh, this is it. It's just pervasive. There's so much media out there. As long as I can remember, that's always seemed like a fascinating thing.
Facebook has acquired Oculus VR, makers of the Oculus Rift headset, for $2 billion.
What do you make of Mark Zuckerberg going on this spending spree?
Today, Facebook just announced it will acquire Oculus VR.
Lucky floated his idea for Rift on Kickstarter while in college, raising $2.5 million from game developers.
CEO Mark Zuckerberg, quote, Oculus has the chance to create the most social platform ever.
It's pretty wild to think that it's been 10 years now since Facebook announced that they were going to acquire Oculus for $3 billion. A lot's happened in 10 years, and it leaves us with a lot of questions of, well, how is the industry? How far have we actually come? Is the industry anything close to what people like Palmer Luckey, one of the co-founders of Oculus, actually wanted it to be by now? Meta at least seems to think that it's still worth it with how much money they're continuing to pour into the industry, with the fact that they rebrand and change their name from Facebook to Meta just to kind of claim the metaverse before it even became a real thing, and then in effect killing off the name Oculus, and more of the symbols and the names are disappearing all over it. But even just this year, as we're finally seeing Apple enter the ring, it seems like more and more people are starting to really believe in virtual reality, extended reality, mixed reality, augmented reality, or whatever you want to call it. A big problem that Meta has seen now for years is those Quests, the 20 million that they claim to have sold last year. People have bought them, but then let them sit on the shelf. This is known as retention rate. This is whether people are actually picking up their headset and playing games with it, or if they get it, play it for a little while, and then let it sit. At GDC this last week, Chris Pruitt, Meta's director of content ecosystem, advised developers that Quest 3 owners are actually returning to continuously use apps at a higher rate than they've seen before. This, of course, sounds like an echo if you've been following the industry for years, when in 2019, John Carmack, when he was still a part of Meta, and those were good times, had actually said that the original Quest had higher retention than any of their previous Oculus headsets. Of course, those were PC-based wired headsets. I will say personally, the Quest 3 I have found has been a nice, easy headset to slap on, especially with all the modifications I have on mine to make it more comfortable and make the battery last longer. But even with the Quest Pro, I found at times I was getting back in more and more often than I was with the Quest 2, or of course the Quest 1 or PCVR. But if you're someone who grew up on PCVR or started with it, you know that it can be very finicky and can be a lot to work around, especially if you were trying to create content in it. An interesting point one article brought up talking about this over on Upload VR was saying that people might be more engaged with the Quest 3 because of its higher cost. These were people that were more excited to spend the money on the technology, and there is the sunk cost principle to think about. If someone sees their headset sitting there and thinks, I paid $650 for that, I need to play it, versus if they thought, oh, I'm only paying $200 now after the recent price cut of the Quest 2, it might motivate them more to get their money's worth out of the headset. People also pointing to the fact that the Quest 3 does have the improved pass-through, although the pass-through for me personally has mostly been a gateway from getting in the headset to getting in a game. It does make it feel less closed off when I need to do that, but I'm not spending a lot of times playing games in mixed reality or even being in mixed reality myself. I'm curious out there, for those of you who actually think you're using mixed reality more than the virtual reality, what exactly are you doing with it? But as the time is continuing and Meta seems to be betting more and more on mixed reality, we're seeing the improvements really come with it. Mixed reality itself and the headsets may be in their infancy, but even since the Quest 3, we've seen a lot of launches and features that are starting to help tie the real world together with the virtual in mixed reality. One of the most interesting and I think compelling ones is the relighting systems. So this would be if you're playing a game and a bright orb shows up in the room, all of a sudden the rest of the actual real room through your pass-through is lighting up too. We're seeing this feature with Figment XR where you can actually check out something like a ball in a room that is lighting up through its frame, and that frame is shadowing on the entire room around. Now, of course, if you look closely, some of this is actually more immersion breaking, where a fan that is above should be casting shadows in a different direction. It's still compelling to see how this can actually change mixed reality, because at first it really felt like every app that had mixed reality, it was your real room around you with a very cartoony object in front of it. Of course, an important element of any mixed reality is you really have to have your room set up really well to not end up just breaking any immersion that you can create. As we talked about recently in the news, we're seeing advances even there using machine learning, where the room could actually be scanned around you much better than you're having to do in the Quest now. This would then automatically identify objects in the room, and then the virtual characters could interact with those objects. Or off in the distant future, as we showed you that demo of, some things could actually grab real world objects, recreate them in the mixed reality world, world through virtual reality, delete the real object, and then be affecting the real world around you. A big theme at Meta Connect this last year when I actually got to go was Meta talking about how they wanted to try and make things easier for these developers who are trying these experiments, especially in mixed reality now, and trying to help further the industry. We're continuing to see them make good on this promise. At GDC this year, they were talking more about Oculus Publishing, which was Meta's brand for third-party publishing relationships, announced last year at GDC, saying that there was 150 titles in the works at the time, and now Meta's aiming to help at least 20 small newly formed teams rapidly building more prototypes for the Quest 3. Now, there have been programs like this for years now, even the developer of Luna on Quest telling us that they had actually worked through a program like this with Oculus before that helps these developers get the funding they need to actually get their games out. This is promising for developers, especially as right now the Quest is seen as the headset you have to develop for if you're really hoping for your app to be successful and make money down the road. It's good for us in the industry to see that success, especially those of us who have been following a while, but it has felt like when Meta dropped the Quest at such a cheap price, they really edged out a lot of their competition. And it's been nice actually being able to talk about Apple entering the space as another big name and seeing how things are actually going for them. The Apple Vision Pro, of course, an exorbitantly expensive headset that's out of reach for most people at $3,500, did launch in the US, and Apple was continuing to claim that it's doing better than they expected, upping their production rates and continuing to support the headset. Now they're actually confirming that it's launching in China this year, and that's a big factor against this now developing Meta versus Apple battle, because Meta has been forced out of China for a while now. In the world of VR recently, Meta has been the main name in most of the world, but in China, the Pico headset is actually much more well known and available because it's not blocked by its own government. Now Apple may be able to bridge this gap, being available in both countries. We saw this coming as recently there was more languages added to the Apple Vision Pro, including traditional Cantonese and simplified Chinese. And not only are they continuing to expand the reach, but they're continuing to update the Vision Pro with OS 2 reportedly coming this year, talking about it bringing 3D spatial personas in stark contrast to the flat 2D personas we've seen so far that you make by scanning yourself, and even rumors that an Apple Pencil is going to come with Vision Pro support, being basically the first real type of controller this would have. It's been interesting to follow the Apple Vision Pro, although it's too expensive for us to get our eyes in yet. It seems like there have been areas where people say it's so much better and it's so amazing, but other areas where it's still catching up to the headsets that we've had for years that have things like Google Earth. But now Spatial Earth is a new app that's actually kind of bringing the magic of Google over to the Vision Pro. If somehow you've never actually tried Google Earth in VR or one of its other competitors, it is a surprisingly cool experience to look over the world and then drop into the map, especially if it's of places you used to live, and see what it looks like, reminisce. Spatial Earth on Apple Vision Pro isn't quite going for that. It's bringing in the 3D maps into your world, but it doesn't have an immersive mode, at least yet, that would drop you in fully to re-experience those parts of the world again. But I personally have been finding it fun to follow the Apple Vision Pro and see what apps are coming for it that do make that price a bit more justifiable, although I'm really hoping there will be a second Vision headset that comes out with a much lower price tag so that we can get one. But what a lot of people are wanting to see is the VR games we've already had fully experienced through the great looking screens of the Apple Vision Pro. And weirdly, as people are trying to get Steam VR stuff working more on the Vision Pro, we're seeing some wild things like people trying to play Half-Life Alyx and other Steam VR games with Nintendo Joy-Cons as the controller. And although ultimately people who have tried haven't been able to get Half-Life Alyx to be fully playable, it would be wild to even be able to stand in that entry screen and see the Citadel around you just to look through the Vision Pro and see what this is like. It brings us to the question though of PCVR and where are we going with it, especially as we're seeing less headset support for it. Of course, Meta's Quest can be played fully on PC. You can play PC games through it, but it seemed like there used to be so many PC capable headsets and we're getting less and less of them coming out. Where one of the other big names in the VR industry is the Sony PSVR2, and they recently said that they were working on some sort of Steam support. Well, now PlayStation VR 2's new firmware update might suggest that PC support would be direct via some type of adapter. Before this firmware update, if you plugged a PSVR 2 into the right port on a PC, it would find it as a monitor. Well, now with its latest firmware update, it no longer shows a monitor inside of your headset like a big virtual screen, but it now presents as an actual virtual reality headset. Although a driver, of course, is missing on the PC to make it fully work, this is causing a lot of speculation that the PSVR 2 may be able to either have an adapter and plug into PC, or is it possible, since it's already a USB-C, that it could be plugged directly in. One of the big problems, of course, with that is that most USB-C ports wouldn't supply enough power to it, making it possibly necessary to have some sort of a breakout box in between that would also run to to a power outlet. But with these reports that the PSVR 2 is piling up in warehouses and they're actually stopping production due to having so many units, could it be possible that the PSVR 2 actually becomes the main PC headset? And with that, people on Reddit being hopeful that this means maybe the PSVR 2 would also get a price decrease. If they can make the PSVR 2 a competent and powerful PC headset, it seems like they could continue to justify that $500 or $550 price tag. But personally for me right now, it does feel like a very hefty price tag on top of already having to buy or own a PS5, especially with the compelling experience you can get with newer games on the Quest 3 and its optics versus what you're getting with a PSVR 2. And that's coming from me who owns 2 PSVR 2s and full setups to play them, and sadly lets it collect more dust than I would like to. Personally for me, of course, I love VR, so I want to say that we have come a long ways in all these years. But looking back at the VR industry, it feels like the one huge change that happened was making a wireless headset. Before the Quest was out, I showed so many people the PSVR. They were so compelled by the experience, and then when it came to having to deal with a wire, very few of them ever bought it. But tons of the people who I've shown the Quest 2, the Quest 3 have went and gotten one afterwards because the price was right and there was just no wire. That wire is such an inconvenience to so many people. I actually dropped a poll out there to see, how do you feel about wired headsets right now? But it seems like it's pretty clear how people are feeling about cables with their headsets. But with all that going on in the news this week, I just want to know, how are you feeling about the VR industry? How long have you been a part of it? Do you feel like it's advancing fast enough, or do you feel like it's kind of slowed down, or it needs to advance in a different direction? I ultimately think we need more simplicity. We need more all-in-one setups that work really well and can be approachable for people. Being without cables was a big step, but VR is still a tough thing even to demo to new people who want to try it, because it can be tough to even know what's going on inside the headset if you have unreliable casting. Let's continue the conversation in the comments. I'd love to hear where you're feeling about it. Thank you once again for coming out and hanging out with me, and I'll see you in another reality.